The Brazilian Shirt Name Podcast with Dotun and Tim Vickery.
Yeah, on the Brazilian Shirt Name Podcast this time around, we've got the football writer Chris Lepkowski, who is with us now. I said Lepkowski. Oh no! See, I was supposed to say Lepkowski. Of course it is. I only did that on purpose. Chris, welcome back.
Hello, good to be back. Nice to see you both.
Yeah, Tim got me thinking the Big Lebowski, and I apologise. But for those who don't know, it's Lepkowski, as in, a V for a W. But you've got a great book out, the Slum Sport. People's eyebrows might go up because not everybody remembers that infamous newspaper quote about football from Once Upon a Time. Explain, please.
Yeah, well, 1985, the calendar year, was pretty bad in football. We had, I think, from the 6th day of the year, there was trouble in an FA Cup game between Burton and Leicester that forced the game to be replayed. And as we got further into the spring of 1985, it culminated in massive disorder in a cup game between Luton and Merseyside.
Oh, shoot.
See,
you remember
this is exactly what happened to English football in 1985. Everything went on freeze. Stop all time.
Well, we're going to get there. Because it was the big football blackout as well that we're going to be talking about. Do you remember that? It was like a 3-day week of blackouts, wasn't it?
Well, you couldn't see the start of the season. No one saw it, because now he's gone away for a while. Should we stop calling him Lepkowski?
Honestly, Chris, I did not. But the good thing is, everybody watching this Brazilian Shirt Name podcast will remember how to pronounce your name and know where to get the book as a consequence. So don't worry about that.
Please proceed with
1985 and all of that.
Horribilis of 1985.
Good phrase. I hope you use it in your book. Sorry, go on.
I got to St Andrews, I think, and there was a riot there. A young fan lost his life, and then we had on the same day we had the Bradford disaster, where so many people lost their lives in that awful blaze. And it was I think it was the following Sunday or the week after, where the Sunday Times described in an editorial that football was a slum sport watched by slum people, words to that effect. And this was before Heysel happened. So you can imagine what the tone would have been like just a couple of weeks later. And I thought that was an ideal title, really, for a look back on what followed. Which is where my book picks up. Really, it picks up on the events of spring 1985 and what followed in the summer of that year and in the subsequent season.
How old at this time was Chris Lepkowski? Kovsky. How old were you at this time?
I was very young. I was 9 years old. I would turn 10 later that year, so you can see where my birthday is going this year, or which particular milestone I'll be hitting. So I was very young, but I think everyone has that season in their lives, that football experience that kind of hooks them into the game, whether it's a World Cup or a major tournament, or in my case, it happened to be, I think it was probably the 1985 FA Cup final, which wasn't a particularly good game. But I remember that I watched that from start to finish. And by start, I mean, I literally got to watch the whole build-up, watch the coaches going in, watch the fans flocking down. And I remember watching the game. And, of course, it was the first sending off in a cup final, FA Cup final, and the incredible goal by Norman Whiteside. And I was getting to an age where I was starting to swap comics for football magazines. And as I explain in the book, it was the year that my dad saved for months and months and months to buy this enormous TV. that lo and behold had teletext. And it completely transformed my consumption of football. And instead of coming home and watching kids' TV, I was going onto teletext, finding out which manager had been sacked or which player was moving to Arsenal or Man United. So it was one hell of a year for me to get into football. Yeah,
it's an important season for me as well. 85, 86, and I am, Lord, that explains the grey hairs. I'm 10 years older, I think, than you. I was 20 when just turning 20.
Somebody older. There's always somebody older.
Oh, praise the Lord! Yeah, praise the Lord for that. And so, in the previous years, I drifted out of football a little bit. I still watched, I still played, but it wasn't because the music scene, that post-punk thing. It was so great. There was just so much going on. And for me, this is interesting about the way you start your book. The moment when I felt that was over was Live Aid, which, and fair credit to all the. I'm not sure it achieved very much. Charity seldom does, but full credit to all the people who really, gave a lot of their time. And a lot of effort to make that work, but in cultural terms, it was the end for me. It was the end. There was a real, if you were into the stuff, those early 80 years, there was a really anti-rock vibe, really strong anti-rock vibe, and there was so much going on. And then Live Aid kind of brought them all back. It brought all the rock dinosaurs back, and it gave them a platform. And the moment when I realised it was all over was Queen, because first of all, they're all being presented to Charles and Di. This is music. You don't want to do that. You don't. It's especially in what should be a kind of anti-imperialist type thing about what's happened to Africa. You're all genuflecting in front of Charles and Di. For me that was the first betrayal of, and then Queen, who were a right-wing band, certainly at the time, and had recently done South Africa. They were on the United Nations blacklist of playing South Africa. And here they are kind of playing at home because they're a stadium rock band, And I vividly just remember the moment. I was thinking, this is all wrong. There's something wrong here. I'm feeling that my culture is being taken away from me. But I'm thinking, at least there's one song that they cannot be so crass as to do. They did. No Time for Losers, because we are the champions of the world at Live Aid. And you think, this is just totally wrong. And so I was beginning to drift, the music thing and football. It kind of needed everyone who loved it to get back into it and save it. That was a feeling that I had at the time. This. Because that slum sport thing, it was quite common to hear that this is a dying activity, this is a dying sport, and I think quite a lot of the fanzine movement came out of that kind of feeling. Now we're not going to let this die. This thing is too good. It's too important. So for me, that 85, 86 is especially because I was at college and I've never been out of the country, and I'm watching, the build up to the World Cup and in the World Cup itself with people from all over the country and all over the world. That's where I kind of got all the enthusiasm back for it. So it's a very evocative season for me, being 10 years older than you were at the time.
I almost feel bad now for naming one of my chapters after a Queen song, although I do say that I'm not a Queen fan.
It is wrong. It is wrong.
Yeah.
No one was. I don't remember any Queen fans when I was a kid. All the people who weren't into music like Queen. If you're into music, there was so much other things to get into. I can't understand how they've come out on top. Can't understand. It baffles me.
I think it's quite interesting. You mentioned your sort of progress through music and the music you were into at a certain age and the new wave, the post.
See, so this is it's a sad metaphor for the state of I still consider it our island, isn't it? Can't even get a decent internet connection these days. You know.
Well, you can.
How old were you? Yeah, you've got one. How old were you in 85, 86, and where were you at the time?
I was at university. I'd returned to the UK to study philosophy at the University of Essex. I was having a great time there. Obviously, I was back
Culture
in
stuff,
university.
so much to answer for.
It does, and back at in university life. Oh, welcome back, Chris. I must just say that Tim made an uncalled for slur against our great nation based on your internet connection. Goodness gracious! I mean,
do you know what? I am going to move to a different part of the house and hope that that has an effect. Okay.
Yeah,
So
yeah. Don't worry. You take your time. Yeah. But me and Tim have got lots to talk about.
You come back from Sweden, and you know one of the fascinating things of going abroad is the different perspective it gives you on your own country. It's one of the great reasons for going abroad. So when you've gone to Sweden, what kind of island are you coming back to, and how are you seeing England at that point in the mid-80s?
Well, remarkably, I don't think it changed very much because, you know, it'd been through. I left at the beginning of the Thatcher era, and I came back in the middle of the Thatcher era. So politically, you might not remember how that government, and particularly Mrs. Thatcher, dominated
I remember it very
the political
well.
landscape. And we're coming on to that because she plays an integral part in the war against football that Chris is going to talk about and has talked about in his book. So remarkably, not very much change had happened. I think.
But what about your relationship with the place?
I think that changed because I'd been elsewhere and I'd seen. I'll tell you one thing I noticed. But I kind of knew it because I used to come back in my holidays every sort of 6 months or 4 months or so. One thing that had changed has changed elsewhere in the world. Like if I go back to Sweden now, it's exactly the same change. That if you're, you know, a person of color, you see more people of color prominently, and that was between 1979 and 84, maybe 1980 and 1984, 85. In those 5 years, suddenly there were loads of people of color at university of my generation, which there weren't before. Sorry, Chris.
I remember an Asian friend of mine, almost in tears of joy about the 87 election, which for many was quite traumatic. But there's this big influx of MPs of color.
Well, there's four. There's four.
Yeah.
Not a huge influx, but there's four.
In percentage terms, that was a big increase.
Well, it was.
And he's saying, you know, we're getting there. We're beginning to storm the fortress.
Well, I wouldn't necessarily say that they were the exemplary four. I think Bernie Grant is the one that sticks out as the one that you thought was a leader that was needed at that time. Paul Boateng, well, you make your own conclusions up. Diane Abbott, still there, strong longevity, and Keith Vaz, oh dear, oh dear, oh dear. However, let's get back to the book because this is intriguing. There's so much in this Slum Sport book of yours, Chris, that needs unraveling. We've just talked about Margaret Thatcher because you describe in your book as a war on football, a sort of political attack based on some of what you've said already. Hooliganism was part of the landscape. I was going to ask you how you think, you know, hooliganism became part of football. I know you were only 9-10 years old at the time, but if you thought about it subsequently, but also tell us what happened politically, because it seems like from reading your book, it was a series of different events that just seemed to play in the government and the government of Mrs. Thatcher's, you know, played to their tune almost, that they were able to use it as a way of clamping down on football and football support.
Well, you're absolutely right that the war on football is appropriate. There's a great, there's an image that I remember seeing of Margaret Thatcher kissing both Kevin Keegan and Emlyn Hughes outside number 10 a few years earlier, when it of course suited her agenda to be involved in the England football team at the time that qualified for the Euros. But it was very clear that Margaret Thatcher created this cultural identity where she felt there was no such thing as society. And she'd spent a lot of time dismantling the whole communities, really, industrial communities, mining communities. She effectively, or her government effectively, went to war with Liverpool, which was quite unfortunate, considering that the two Merseyside clubs were the preeminent clubs during this period, and almost joined forces would be the wrong term, but they were certainly united in their feelings against Margaret Thatcher. And as I said before, I was rudely interrupted by my connectivity issues. Football was a sport that you didn't aspire to like. You didn't want to be associated with it. And a lot of that was because of the perception that was built by people like Thatcher, people much like the miners. The miners' strike ended early in 85. And football fans were treated in that same way, not to be trusted. If the police get onto them, then the police are to use whatever measures are necessary to control those thugs, whether they're thugs, hooligans, or just normal fans. And Margaret Thatcher was determined to stamp it out. And when Heysel happened, she effectively brought in a bunch of people from the Fourth Estate, journalists, broadcasters who had been at Heysel to get their view. And what she was hoping for was to get a unanimous, well, yeah, Prime Minister, we need to do something about this. But actually, they went back and said, well, this is what you've created. This is the society that you have created. And it was interesting that in the aftermath of Heysel, Thatcher sent the, I think it was the Vice Deputy of London Fire Brigade to go over to Heysel and look at the stadium and to look at the reasons why Heysel happened. Now, what she wanted was for him to come back and say, yep, our football hooligans, Mom, they caused this disaster. But what he came back with was a series of faults with a stadium that should never have been used for a game of that magnitude.
The whole thing is a disaster from start to finish, isn't it? It's, Liverpool are saying don't play in this stadium. No, Liverpool is saying don't sell the tickets the way that you're selling the tickets. The police operation is an absolute disaster. But still, it wouldn't happen without the charges, would it? It wouldn't have. And part of this is because there's a lot of foppish violence in England, isn't it? There's a lot of performative kind of violence.
It's dandyism, isn't it?
Yes,
dandyism.
Yes, yeah. And a lot of those charges, you're not going to get there and kick crap out. There are some people who are going to, but a lot of it is just kind of performative for show. But obviously, the Italians don't know that.
Yeah, and football fans will target football fans. In this country, they identify by the clothes they wear. Now, normal members of public do get caught up in that. Of course they do, but they are not the target for English football hooligans at this point. English football hooligans are targeting hooligans. And that's where this huge disc join happened with the people in that particular pen at Heysel, who were ordinary people in many respects going to watch a football match because tickets were made available by UEFA's inept ticketing policy for that game.
Which Liverpool said, please don't do. But one thing, I remember this coming out really strongly from the press reports of the time, was the class difference between the England supporters and the Italian supporters. How much more middle class a lot of the Italian supporters were in terms of their professions. The press read, and so this is just before the kind of rebranding of the game, about which I've such mixed feelings. How do you feel about the changes? Because this year that you're talking about is absolutely crucial in the creation of a different football culture. And there's lots of strands creating that different football culture. Lots of different strands, because football is never just top down; it's always bottom up as well. But how do you feel about the world that 1985 helped create?
Oh, I remember when I was researching this book, and I was going through old newspapers and magazines, and what struck me, I went to the Sunday People a week before the football season started of that 1985-86 season. Now, these days, you'd be pulling out supplements with expert opinion from ex-players, current players, managers. There was one interview, one preview, an interview with Henry Cooper, of all people, nothing else. And that's where football was. Other than the bog standard match report, it was very skinny, the football coverage. And what we had at the time, and you know, we'll go on to probably talk about the fact that there was no football on TV for 4 or 5 months, because the cartel of ITV and BBC, of course, no Sky back then, they knew that football had a value and they were not prepared to pay that. Why should they? When 20 million are watching snooker, Nigel Mansell is starting to win Grand Prix in his car. Athletics is solid. We've got Frank Bruno and Mike Tyson rivalry emerging. So who's going to watch this product? Especially more so now that they've devalued it, because UEFA and our government have decided to withdraw the clubs from European competition. Football's a dying sport in 1985, and the TV companies knew that, but there were people at football clubs, people like David Dean, Philip Carter, Robert Maxwell emerged, people who actually said, well, hang on, actually, this is still the number one sport and people still want to watch it, whether you like it or not, so start paying us appropriately. And what we had were the two sides unable to reach an agreement. No football
this is history.
For 4 months.
This is proper history, you know. It tickled me no end to read about the irony of Robert Maxwell, the great fraudster of the British media, great rival to Rupert Murdoch once upon a time, being the person, because he's now chairman of or owner of Oxford United, being the person to say to the, you know, to the BBC and ITV and the FA, no, football's worth more than this. This is the exact value of football. You lot are only paying 8 million quid for it, but it's worth, you know, 20 million or whatever the sums were at that time. But I stress the point that this is history, because, and it is an important history that will be overlooked if not for your book. And we should talk about the blackout now, but let me just say very quickly, history is of its time, if that makes sense. And you've described everything so thoughtfully about the process of events. You know, history doesn't happen suddenly with the assassination of the Grand Archduke, and then suddenly we have World War One. History is an amalgamation of different things coming together, and 1985 seems to be bringing all these things together, for better or worse. Seems to be, you know, the argument over the value of television, with the backdrop of Heysel, with the backdrop of Bradford, with the backdrop of all this hooliganism going on at the time, with the backdrop of having Margaret Thatcher, a prime minister who sees football and football fans as a threat. So, and you in West Bromwich have got this brand new spanking TV with a great new gizmo called Teletext, but there's nothing to watch. What do you remember about your first season, full season, with a television but nothing to watch at the beginning? And how did it get to that stage? It's almost unimaginable now. If there was a blackout of television, the ratings for all the sort of overseas television, or I'm sorry, blackout of football, the ratings for all the overseas games would just shoot up, because we will find football. You can't black it out anymore. So for us youngers, explain, how did it happen?
Well, I should add, we did have a TV before this. It just wasn't as all singing as all dancing.
Of course not.
But what I do remember,
and it wasn't colour either.
Possibly, I can't remember. But what I do remember was my dad loved football, but he liked to watch it on telly. He wasn't really one for going to matches because he didn't like big crowds. To which my punchline would always be, well, West Brom are only getting about 12,000, you know, in a 30,000. But anyway, he wasn't going to take the hooliganism was obviously a big reason for that. He didn't particularly want me and him to be caught up in something unsavoury. So I was all for looking forward to watching the 1985-86 season pan out. I watched the Charity Shield. Man United got beaten against Everton. The highlights were only shown, and then nothing. I'm like, where is it? It's not here. And I started again reading magazines and teletext time. A blackout. There was no football shown. There were a handful of games shown that weren't Football League games. So the very unfortunate Wales versus Scotland match was shown when Jock Stein passed away, and a handful of England's internationals, World Cup qualifiers, and I think a couple of friendlies. Other than that, if you wanted to watch football, you had to go into the stadium and watch football. That we had the whole, ironically, it was this particular period that Saints and Greavesy started on ITV. And there was a segment on there where they took out this young, good-looking blonde fella with a Scottish accent across they took him around London, asking people, do you know who he is? Nobody knew. One person recognised him, a cab driver. It's Frank McAvenny. Frank McAvenny scored 28 goals that season. Most of those goals are lost because they weren't recorded by anyone.
West Ham were a sensation that season. And also at the start of the season, and this I think shows the difference between then and now, were United. You know, Ron Atkinson's United were brilliant. But what happened with Ron Atkinson's United is it's a lovely little team built for nice pitches. You know, so the pitches August, September, brilliant. Once they become the mud heaps that they became, then things become much more difficult for United. And you contrast that with the carpets that the players of today have, you know, and that United side, I think, would be they almost certainly would have gone on to be champions, but they just couldn't cope ploughing through the mud.
And he wanted to try and sign Gary Lineker for £800,000, and they wouldn't allow him to bring Lineker in because Frank Stapleton needed moving on. Frank didn't want to leave. They ended up signing Terry Gibson and Peter Davenport for more money than they could have signed Lineker for during that season. And once injuries, of course, Brian Robson was the big one. Every time Brian Robson got injured for Manchester United, their seasons collapsed. It happened 2 years earlier when they could have won the European Cup Winners' Cup, and he got injured on the eve of the semi-final against Juventus. Their season collapsed. Happened this season in 85-86. He got injured, ankle, ligaments, hamstring, and the big one, which cost him effectively a clear run at the World Cup, which was his dislocated shoulder. And United never recovered from that. And I don't think Ron Atkinson really recovered from that. And within months of that season ending, he'd gone, he'd been sacked.
I wonder if
and it should have been. Well, yeah, and it took him a while, by the way. You know, I mean, all this talk now of Ruben Amorim and him being given more years. Well, actually, they did that with Ferguson, and it worked out okay. But you're absolutely right that in 85-86, United effectively were leading a one-horse race. They won the first 10 games and blew it.
I wonder how West Ham fans think about this, because this is the only season in years and years and years that they had a real championship challenge. You know, it just fell away a little bit towards the end. But, you know, McAvenny and Cottee were great together. And if you weren't at Upton Park, you didn't see it. It must be, you know, because at least the fans of the other big clubs, they had other seasons. But West Ham had that season.
Well, West Ham, what really cost them, they actually had a really poor start. And then in January, they didn't play for ages. They barely played because of what was quite a harsh winter. And the Upton Park pitch didn't have heaters. It didn't have undersoil heating. So they caught everyone up. And in the final weekend, they could have won the league. It was between them, Everton and Liverpool. But of course, Liverpool knew how to win trophies. If there was one thing guaranteed, Liverpool weren't going to allow a lead at the top of the table. They weren't going to let that slip. And sadly, West Ham finished third. They probably would have been worthy champions that year. Just bad luck for them, really.
I don't remember a great deal about that. It is remarkable that Liverpool won in, you know, the post with all the post Heysel and all the rest of it. And when I've looked back, it's not a team that I really remember very well. I remember Everton of that era very, very well because, you know, for 3 or 4 years, they had a fantastic side. but I don't remember that it was Dalglish's first season, I think, wasn't it, as the manager. I don't really remember that Liverpool side.
Well, it's the audacity of replacing your retired manager with a footballer, a player manager who was 34. And I think it's a story that isn't probably cherished enough. The fact that Dalglish came in against the backdrop of Heysel and managed to win the league and cup, which is the only time they've done it, the FA Cup and league in the same year. And he did it with a team that Alan Hansen, during that season, told him was the worst Liverpool team he'd ever played in. Now, that's not the worst prediction Hansen would ever make that he got wrong, but it was the start of a few that he did get wrong. And, you know, to their credit, in that final leg, like a thoroughbred team that they were, they came through and made sure they crossed every fence, hurdled every fence with perfection. And that great Everton team, like you say, were just on there. They were leading for so long, and in the end, inevitably, and there's a great story from Graham Sharp in the book where the two teams obviously vying for the league and cup, and somebody in their wisdom within Merseyside decides they're going to give them a joint bus tour in the hope that one wins the league and one wins the cup. So what happens? Liverpool win both, and the Everton players are having to travel back from Wembley on a plane with Liverpool players celebrating, and then they're told they're going to have to jump on a bus and go around the city. Well, Peter Reid said, "Sod that," and it needed his mom to go to the Liverpool Echo and defend him. And Graham Sharp did get on, and he said they sat downstairs drinking beer. Of course, what happens after a few beers on a slow-moving bus? You need the toilet. So Graham Sharp got off the bus, sprinted into somebody's house, knocked on the door. "Can I use your toilet?" Woman said, "Up you go, love. It's up there." He came back down to be greeted by the woman's husband, a Liverpool fan, who swiftly told him to clear off straight out of his house. Graham Sharp walked out, got back on the bus, and carried on driving around Liverpool with the rest of them. But what a thing to do! What a thing to expose those Everton players to.
Easy on the exposure bit. Couple of things. First of all, I'd love to hear what the impact was of football viewing in stadiums during the period when there was a blackout on the telly, whether the crowd numbers went up or, you know, however it was. But also, and you will know that I always veer off into Shakespeare whenever we have a guest as eloquent as yourself. You've got to bring in the old bard. He's from round your way, by the way.
Yeah,
and
Midlander.
He, of course, famously never wrote down a single word. So the folios from which we have gleaned the complete works of Shakespeare were written after his death, when some wise person thought, listen, maybe for posterity we should put some of these great things together. And
there might be some coin in this.
Well, it might be. Not for me, but it may be for other people for years to come. And, you know, they went to actors. In those days, they went to actors who had played parts in Shakespeare, who remembered, of course, their parts verbatim. Not always accurately, because they'll go to 2 or 3 actors and they'll have a slightly different view of what Romeo may or may not have said, but more or less accurate. That's why they're different folios. In a kind of a way, you've done a similar thing with your book, in that because there was a blackout and no official record of those games, you've gone round and managed to glean information about those games from people who remember them, and you put together the history. How did you do that, and what did you do?
Well, I picked out the main stories really of that season. I mean, the 4 obvious ones were the 4 teams at the top: Liverpool, Everton, West Ham, and Man United, because of where they started the season. Reading won 13 of their first games on the bounce, which is a record and still is a record. Middlesbrough almost closed down and had to be effectively kick-started back into life that summer. West Brom, my team, won 4 matches, had 3 managers, and had a farcical season. And then Oxford who we've mentioned, obviously, with their links to Robert Maxwell, won the Milk Cup, while Chelsea won the Full Members Cup. And for anyone wondering what the Full Members Cup was, it was a competition derived for the members of the top two divisions who weren't involved or wouldn't have been involved in Europe, and they were asked to play in a competition that was effectively done off the cuff. And there was so little interest in the Full Members Cup final that at Wembley, the two teams played in a completely unbranded stadium, not a single advert on show, which goes to show really just how it was thought. So I took different footballers, managers and commentators as well for the Jock Steen chapter. I spoke to Clive Tilsley, not Clive Tilsley, Jim Rosenthal, Martin Tyler and Graham Sharp, who played in that game. And I tried to build up a picture, really. I make it very clear, this isn't a book for statos. I'm not here to tell you how many goals were scored in that month or what the XG was. This is people telling their story from a period where I think the stories need to be told. And there were some amazing things that happened. I mean, at one point, you mentioned the attendances. The attendances in the West Midlands were that bad that Birmingham were getting 11,000, West Brom were getting 12, 13, Villa, I think, were getting 16. I
remember a Tottenham game with 12,000.
West Brom, game. Yeah, it was West Brom. They had 12,000 and Tottenham won 5-0. 12,000 at White Hart Lane. Yeah. And the point I was about to make is that the three West Midland clubs actually had serious discussions about ground sharing, which you could not imagine that now. But they did, because they needed a solution to the loss of revenue that was being incurred by so few people coming through the turnstiles. And of course, no TV money to prop them up. Sponsorship money.
Was the lesson of this, with the declining attendances, was the lesson how much football needs TV? Because you were saying earlier on, right, if you want to watch it, the only place is you got to go into the stadium. But there wasn't a big increase of people doing that. And so is that the lesson that comes out of it? The dependency of modern football on TV?
I think what happened during this period, we saw the embryos of the Premier League, because a few things happened. In a couple of years earlier, Irving Scholar took over Tottenham and floated the club. He wanted to upgrade facilities so people could watch games in luxury, have a lovely meal. He could not work out why, in this increasing credit card culture, you couldn't use plastic at White Hart Lane. Then you had David Dean at Arsenal, who had been in the US and seen all the fantastic things they were doing on a match day, not just between 3 and 5 p.m, but throughout the day. And people like Maxwell, who saw the value of everything. And I mean, the crazy thing about David Dean, he was the guy who brought in 15-minute half times. And when he proposed it at a football owners meeting, one of the directors put his hand up at the back and said, "Hey, what's my manager meant to say for an extra 5 minutes at half time?" They couldn't see the commercial value of having people buying more products for an extra 5 minutes. So that's what people like Scholar, like Dean, were dealing with. And actually what Scholar did during this period, he hired a guy called Flynn. I forget his first name, and I apologise for that. Alex, from Saatchi & Saatchi, and he commissioned him to find out the true value of football and the value of advertisement and advertising revenue. And he came back and he returned with a solution that actually football was worth about 10 times what the TV companies were valuing it at. And if football needed and wanted to prosper, it needed to build a breakaway and get away from the clubs, the other 70-odd clubs that were draining their resources.
And one thing that Scholar was big on at Tottenham was the executive box. You know, he knocked down the shelf, you know, which was the most popular side of the ground, you know, and he knocked part of that down for executive boxes, which was all very unfortunate. I did find Maxwell funny when he used to refer to the mismanagement committee. The mismanagement committee. I found that quite funny. It's a nice little line in propaganda. Were all these people shysters?
I don't think they were. I mean, I spoke to one person, Jim Rosenthal. He is quoted as saying that there are 1,000,001 things that Robert Maxwell did wrong in his career, but the one thing he was right about was the value of football. And whether we like what happened with football, and you alluded earlier that maybe what did happen wasn't to your liking and the liking of people of our generation.
I've got mixed feelings about it.
Yeah.
I hate the fact that so many people have been priced out.
Yeah,
I don't like that at all.
And that is a product of what happened, and whether it was for the good of the game, something needed to change. And unfortunately, it would take another disaster further down the line for something to seriously change. And I think that certainly the seeds for what followed in the early 90s were very much sown during this particular period where there was no football on TV in 85 and 86, early 86. And that's when they started to bring about the change, because they knew they had to. They knew that football was going to go down the drain and clubs were going to fold because of it.
Obviously, on your book is written with... Go on.
Go on, no, you Karen.
Your book is written with the knowledge that Hillsborough is going to happen, which, the people at the time don't know. How much is that a shadow? How much does the future, this horrible, dark future, how much does that overshadow your narrative?
I'll try not to let it do so, but of course it does, because you know that although I maybe describe this particular season as a bit of a reset, it isn't the reset that we do get when we have the whole gentrification of football that follows after Italia 90, the fever pitch influence, and of course the Hillsborough disaster, which really is football's most unfortunate of reset buttons, and it does shape it in degree, in so much that I don't really talk about it, but you can't but not help us have it as a touching point of football's narrative. It was part of that era, if not during that season.
It would be amazing, though, for you to do that, the full Shakespeare thing. I'm commending you nevertheless, but to do the full Shakespeare thing and bring together some of the actors of those matches which were never televised, because I can imagine the drama as the striker says, well, this is what happened, yeah? I went to my left and I dropped my shoulder and you went to your right, and the defender says, no, that's not what happened at all. You kicked me in the shins. That's how you scored that goal. But, you can imagine all the drama that comes from there.
Dotun, I would love to know, right, Ken Bates, during this particular year, wanted to install electric fences.
Electric fences at Chelsea.
I would love to know which Shakespeare character Ken Bates would be.
Well, he bought Stamford Bridge for £1, as you remind us in your book. I'd forgotten about that. He also, let's not forget, even though he was a property developer in his trade, you point out that he also saved Stamford Bridge from the property developers who would have made a mint out of it, and that stadium would now be tarmacked over to Joni Mitchell's dismay. However, he managed to say, so I would say that in the context of football, and that's the only context in which we can talk about Robert Maxwell without disparaging him fully. The context of football, Ken Bates is a hero. And if we're looking for a hero, I wouldn't quite go as far as Henry the IV or Henry V, but Falstaff, he's kind of a villain, but he makes
he means well, doesn't he?
I'm not sure he does actually, but he makes Hal who he is, and in that sense he becomes a hero, because by the time Hal becomes King Henry V, it's all cry God for England, Harry and whatnot. So
he has to turn his back on Falstaff to do it. I know thee not, old man.
Well, Stamford Bridge, Chelsea had to turn their backs on Ken Bates. He wouldn't put his hand in his pocket enough, and eventually he sold it. Did he buy Leeds after that? I seem to remember. Was it Leeds that he bought after that?
And he'd been involved with Burnley and that before in the 60s.
Wigan. I think he'd been involved in Wigan and Oldham as well. Yeah.
Right.
And cattle marketing. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think you can talk of him as hero. But just one question, though. First of all, is your book then, when Tim was talking about what might be overshadowing your book, the thing that I thought about that is looming, right in front of this football blackout is Sky Television. Does it come as a consequence of that particular blackout, or do some other events happen subsequently?
This is what Scholar and Maxwell are seeing, isn't it? This is the future that they're seeing. Are they seeing it already?
And
in 85?
Berlusconi. Let's not forget Berlusconi in Italy as well.
Yeah, of course. And I mean, it's interesting that during the discussion for rights in 1983, the TV rights, there's a company called Telejecta Video Communications who blow absolutely everyone out of the water with their bid. And their plan is to show football in community places, so hospitals, schools, colleges, community centres, pubs, years before anyone else was doing it. And they had no issue with shirt sponsorship, which in 1983 there still was being displayed. Now, they withdrew their bid, actually. They withdrew their bid and didn't carry it on. But it gave football that little nugget of hope that actually we can get away from this ITV and BBC cartel. And it was during that same period, it was a company called Guinness Marn and a UK entertainment company called Trident who started testing from the orbital test satellite. But nobody was buying these dishes, and it was during this period in 85 that company was sold, much like Stamford Bridge was sold for £1. It was sold for £1 to a guy called Rupert Murdoch, and it became known as Sky TV.
Well, don't suggest what happened to him because he's still very much alive. Let me just leave it there.
I met an old mate yesterday. I used to share a flat with him in Rio. He's back visiting for the first time in years and years and years. And he's a Liverpool fan. And I hadn't seen him for years. And he said, you know what? During the Jurgen Klopp era, I became 9 again. It just transformed me into that 9-year-old. Now, Chris, you were 9 at the time of the events, and you're now 49. As you were writing this book, did the 9-year-old Chris Lepkowski, did the 9-year-old Chris reassert himself? What's the relationship between you of 49 and you of 9? Is there inside you still the 9-year-old motivated by love for football, or have you been totally overtaken by the cynical and jaded 49-year-old?
A little bit of the latter, of course. But when I returned to this particular era, and when I was writing about this and researching it, I did so against the backdrop of a playlist from 1985 and 86. I completely absorbed myself in the music for 2 reasons. Firstly, because I felt I had to be there again, musically and culturally. If that doesn't sound too pretentious, but I felt I had to be there to experience. Yeah. But for the second reason, of a more practical reason, I needed titles for chapters. And I thought if I can find an appropriate chapter, I mean, Oxford United win the Milk Cup as a first division club for the first time. They can be absolute beginners, yeah? Chelsea win the Full Members Cup, which nobody wants to take part in. Right, they can be Owen Paul's My Favourite Waste of Time. Okay, so I tried to match up titles. Now, I have to admit, there are 1 or 2 songs I'm thinking, I don't know what the meaning of this song is, and I'm not going to Google it on a work laptop, okay? I'm just going to go with the flow and hope that the title is okay and nothing more comes out about that. But yeah, I really did feel myself flexing back to that 9-year-old and where I was at the time and what I was doing, and giving that a lot of thought and sort of reappraising what my relationship with football is now and what it was like then, and why we change and why we, have to leave that period behind. Because, 85, 86, nobody really wanted to be a football fan, but there were a few of us who did. And I've got friends of my age who don't really have that same affinity. with football that I do. I simply happened to be hooked in. They weren't. And I read an incredible stat a few weeks ago that no footballer born in 1976 has ever played for England. Now, you put yourself there, and they're my age. They're effectively my school age and a bit younger. So was the lack of the kind of football's mood, the lack of football on TV, people not wanting to take their children to TV, their siblings, not wanting to take their children to matches, not wanting to take their siblings to matches or go with their friends. Did that actually have an impact on people of my age who maybe not even drifted away from football, but never got into football because it just wasn't a sensible or viable thing for them to get into at that age?
I can't believe that all the greats of football didn't see very clearly the business opportunity. Because if you compare it to cricket, you had Kerry Packer saying, look, cricket's worth more than you're paying it, so I'll do my thing, and suddenly owning Test cricket for a minute, at least. That was clear that it was a similar thing with football.
I don't think it was. It certainly wasn't clear to me.
It should have been.
But what it felt like was that it was dying alongside industrial England, which was also dying. And the rebrand, and had you asked me then, I never would have thought that this would be successful. No way. No, it's like I know that there were sociological theories, the Alex Flynn and that doing that at the time, and they were seeing this new affluent market. But I never imagined that at the time. I didn't see that as an opportunity at all. So it took me and I didn't see the all-seater stadiums. I thought, no, never catch on. Never catch on.
No, I didn't see that. I didn't see the all-seater stadium. But what I did see of a generation, my generation, the early 70s, maybe not so much late 60s, but early 70s, certainly to mid 70s, I saw the footballers as our pop stars. That explains why I told you. Of course, they were pop stars to us. Well, Charlie George and everybody, they were pop stars. And I'm talking not the 5th, but the 6th and 7th and the 8th Beatles. They were on our doorstep.
I just remember, the Shoot magazine, the Focus, when the players are asking, it's where I learnt miscellaneous, because they had miscellaneous lights. And
Yes.
But they ask like favorite musician. I don't ask favorite musician, and it was all so bland. It was all crap. It was all
sure.
I remember going to Watford once, and the DJ before the game, he would go in the dressing room and ask a different player, "What's your favorite record?" Right? And I remember, I think it was the big centre back, Steve Sims, and he come up with All Along the Watchtower, the Hendrix cover, and the DJ made a big thing about this. It's an unusual one from a football. Because what they're all listening to, I don't know, Jackson Brown or something, or ABBA, or
they were listening.
They seem to me, especially in comparison with the punk post-punk thing, they seem just really, really uncool. But you're obviously right. And you're clearly right, because they became, and sportswear became the driver, the leisure wear and so on. It did become a big driver, but personally, I didn't see it at all. I never saw that one coming.
Talking of punk, Chris, you say 1985 was the punk period of football, and what happens after that is that horrible, horrible, horrible new wave period that seemed to go on forever and ever and ever.
This is when Adamant sells out. You're going to moan about him again. Get it off your chest. You'll feel better for it. Get it off your chest.
I'm not going to moan about Adamant selling out this time for a change. But I did get that analogy, though. I did get that analogy. It feels like there was an anarchy about the year 1985, certainly from the way that you describe the history in that period. And the anarchy includes anarchy from the establishment. They were as anarchic as anybody else in this odd year of football, at the very least, and sad, tragic, and everything else. then after that, the tragedy, of course, of Hillsborough notwithstanding, and perhaps it's post that it becomes more kind of not new wave. It becomes, new romantics or whatever musical comparison you want to make. But it does feel as if 1985 was that summer of punk, for better or worse. For you, do you certainly feel that way still?
Yeah, I do think so. I think, having spoken to the people I did, there were a lot of mixed feelings. I mean, Tony Cottee was an interesting one, who was at West Ham at the time, because, of course, he was part of this brilliant West Ham team, and they all get on so well, which is great to see still. But he's so angry, really angry about being denied the chance to play in Europe. Big Ron speaks about the talent drain. Not only the talent drain of players leaving the country, but players being underdeveloped because they're not playing European club competition. So we get to a place where Graham Taylor, who wasn't the best England manager, I think we can all agree on that, he hasn't got particularly great players to choose from anyway, further down the line, because it's the first.
Yeah, would it help had he not dropped Christy Waddle and Peter Beardsley? But,
Yeah, of course.
But
the point is, I think the point is that
That's
the players... that the players reflected on this with a lot of mixed feelings, because they were there and they kind of felt that it wasn't a popular industry to be in. They knew that they were being watched. You could turn up to Goodison Park or Anfield at 5-3 and get in without having to queue. And these were the two best teams in England. So it was a difficult period for them, but there's a lot of nostalgia from them as well. A lot of looking back and thinking, well, we got away with stuff that you could never get away with now.
Right.
I think you've answered.
People who are like 30 now, do you think it would be a real shock for them to read your book and see this is how it was not that long ago?
I think it would. I think anyone who doesn't remember life before the Premier League would really struggle to comprehend why football was in the mid-80s and how in 1 month in May 1985, especially the things that happened, because during that few weeks, we learnt a lot of things that we already knew, but were played out in the public domain and were made stark. The fact that our fans couldn't behave themselves, the fans that football authorities couldn't organise what in a brewery, that fans couldn't be trusted, that stadium maintenance wasn't of any value, because Bradford City Stadium was due to be upgraded, and it was just a bleak, horrible time. And I think what I try to do is to kind of treat that as the winter of football, and then the spring that emerges, if that's an analogy I've just made up, but that's how it feels. That I want to give hope with the chapters that follow 1985, the May of 85, that actually, it wasn't that bad. There was some good things about football back then, but you would not recognise the football of back then with what it is now.
What a story. An incredible book in many ways, and well done for doing it. So the book's called The Slum Sport. It's by, I guess, Chris Lepkowski. Did I say that right? Okay.
Yes, yeah.
Lepkowski, yeah. No, apologies. When your name's Adebayo, you need to get everybody else's right. Chris Lepkowski. Look, it's a wonderful book, and I urge people to go out and check it out. It's his.
Do you remember there was a big hit at the time. It was a great, one of my favourite records from this era. D Train, remember D Train, Dotun? You're the one for me.
Yeah, I remember.
This book.
Oh, you're the one for me. Yeah.
Yeah, you're the one for me. Yeah, this book. Chris, this is the one for me. This should be your banner here. Yeah, this is the one for me. Let's examine the way we were, what we can learn for good and bad from this, and wallow in a little bit of nostalgia as well. Fabulous idea, great idea.
Can I thank you both and just say that if anyone does wish to pre-order a copy, then they can go to curtis-sport.com, head down to the books, or just type in the Slum Sport into your favoured search engine, Google, I would suggest, and you'll be able to find details there of how to pre-order it. But I've really enjoyed going back in time with you guys. Thank you for having me on.
Man, let's hope that you become a Slum Sport millionaire out of it as well. Why not?
You've been guarding that one. You've been guarding that one, haven't you? You've written that down somewhere. I know you're going.
Months in the making. But it's good to know that no animals were hurt in the making, and certainly not that rat that ran across the pitch the other day. Yeah, it's been wonderful. Let's do it again. And do remember, if you are watching this, that tomorrow we'll have the Global Sport Interactive as well, where you can join in the conversation. Chris, for now, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Get in touch with the Brazilian Shirt Name Podcast on Twitter at BrazilShirtPod, or you can email us BrazilianShirtNamePod@gmail.com. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe, rate and tell a friend. The Brazilian Shirt Name Podcast is an 1129 production.